Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome to another live Dharma sharing. Today we will be starting a new topic. This is Awakening Series number 10, 16th of August, 2021. The new topic we are starting today will be the insecurity of life, realities in the dream of existence. This is a follow-on topic after we have completed the topic on Paticca Samuppada. Okay, so without further ado, let us now share this link. You may download the presentation slides from this link to follow the presentation today. So let us begin. I'll just open up. Okay. So let us begin today's sharing. What we have covered so far, I will just quickly run through the Paticca Samuppada because this is related to completing the Paticca Samuppada. So we will just quickly run through. Paticca Samuppada basically, as Bhante Punnaji has put it, it is the logical antecedents, concurrence of logical antecedents. And basically, this is when Bodhisattva Siddhartha woke up from the meditation where he stopped the mind into a state of insentience, and upon waking up, he became the Sama Sambuddha. So in the case of awakening to Paticca Samuppada, this is what the Buddha observed as he awoke from the state of insentience. The first thing that started was a series of activities that triggered the process of perception, the Panchakanda, and with the Panchakanda, the process of Sankara began, then putting together Sanya Vedana, producing perception, Vijnana. This is the beginning of the cognitive process called Mano. And with this construction of the Vijnana, then comes the constructed entity and categorized identity of objects being perceived by each sense organs. That is the Nama Rupa. And then applying all the six sensory realms, the five physical senses and the sense of mind. So being able to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and cognize, putting it all together, then these six sensual realms, Salayatana, is able to construct the Phassa. And with Phassa, then this is the cognition, the complete cognition, becoming conscious of the objective experience we call the world. And this is when the concept of the world, the existence of a world, is created in the cognitive process. So basically, this completes the cognitive process, Mano. And completing this cognitive process, Mano, to create the concept of a world, which is the objective experience. When this is created, then we begin to experience this objective experience and start to feel something about it. So we start to experience the feelings of pleasant and unpleasant, right? So pleasant and unpleasant feelings arise because of the concept of the world. And then this is the start of the affective process, the chitta. This is the emotional mind starting off from sensing the feeling, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, whatever we experience through our senses. So with the starting of this feelings of pleasant and unpleasant, Vedana, then comes our reaction. We begin to react. Three kinds of reaction. Kama Tanha, which is reacting to pleasant feelings. Vibhava Tanha, reacting to unpleasant feelings. And Bhava Tanha, reacting to the subjective experience of leading to the delusion of a self-centered existence. This is the emotional reaction to feelings of the objective experience. And basically, there are three kinds of behavior arising from this reaction. Lobha means lust and greed for pleasant experiences. Dosa means aversion and hatred towards unpleasant experiences. And moha means the delusion of self-centered existence. With this experience, this is the subjective experience. We begin to personalize it and call this is mine. This is my experience. This is my reaction. And this personalization, upadana, leads us to personalize everything we perceive through our senses. So it's called pancha upadana khandha. So this is personalizing this subjective experience. And with that, we begin to create the existence of a self, thinking that a self must exist. So therefore, coming into existence, imaginary self in this imaginary world, and creating the notion of a self, and the body became the self. And basically, this completes the affective process, chitta. This is the emotional process of mind. And this is our emotional subjective experience. And from there, it leads to being born again and again. So jati, the birth, which, because we have now personalized the body, so birth becomes the past of the body, and aging becomes the present of the body, and death becomes the future of the body. And with this, we begin to enter into the insecurity of life. So this is really what we're going to focus on from now on, this insecurity of life, dukkha. And from there comes a whole mass of suffering, soka, parideva, dukkha, domanassa, and upayasa. So we will go into these different aspects of suffering in more details later on. So the main topic we're going to cover would be this insecurity of life. All because of our emotional reaction, this affective process, the emotional subjective experience. So in discussing insecurity of life, we will be discussing a lot about our emotional subjective experience. And basically, when we speak about the mind, there are three parts of the mental experiences, and the Buddha used three words to describe the mind. I think many of you are familiar with this, but it doesn't matter. I think for the benefit of those who are not familiar, we will just quickly run through. First, the Buddha used the word vijnana to describe perception, the process of perception, panchakanda arising. And that leads to the awareness of what was perceived through our sense organs. So in the mind, the first thing is to be aware of what has been perceived through the sense organs, right? All five physical sense organs as well as the mind. So there are 6 sensual fields that we become aware of. And with that, the cognitive process arises, mano. And this leads to cognition and conception. Cognition is basically being able to identify what you have perceived, right? So it's basically categorized identification of the perceived image called rupa by assigning a name or a label to what was perceived. Because if you identify something, you must call it a name or call it something. So therefore, what was perceived arises in the form of a mental image in the mind, rupa. And then what was identified is given a name or a label, that is nama. And that is the role of this cognitive process, assigning the name. And with that, the cognitive process is aware of experience, cognizing experience. So we are aware of the objective experience. And with that, we begin to create concepts about the objective experience, choices associated with the objective experience. And then the next part of the mind is chitta, the affective process that leads to mood and temperament. It's called mood and temperament. Bhante Punnaji described it as mood and temperament because, simply put, chitta basically is experiencing the feeling, right? A feeling of what was perceived. So the vedana of what was perceived, whether it was pleasant or unpleasant. So when it is pleasant, we are in a good mood. So mood means we feel good. When it is unpleasant, we don't feel good. And that is the mood part. And when we feel good or don't feel good, we begin to have the urge to react. This urge to react is temperament. That's why it's called temper. If you react very unwholesomely or react very angrily to whatever you experience, then people are saying you have a temper. That's where the word temperament comes from. So this temperament describes our urge to react. And this reaction is an emotional reaction, and it is called tanha. And this is the reaction to the feelings of what was experienced. And with that, we personalize these reactions, upadana. And this leads to the notion of a self-centered existence, bhava tanha. So basically, these are the three parts of the mental experiences. We're going to look at how the mano and the chitta are often in conflict. And that is what leads to insecurity of life. The conflict between mano, which is the thinking mind, the ability to perceive a reality or what we believe to be reality, and chitta, which is basically wanting things, hating things, fearing things, and stuff like that. This is the emotional experience, the emotional reaction, subjective emotional experience, the chitta. This is the important thing about Bhante Punnaji's lessons. He basically explained the differentiation between mano and chitta. If you read Buddhist texts, you will find in many books, when people translate this, they simply call it mind. But without differentiating, it's very hard to understand which aspect of mind, because there's one aspect of mind which is the ability to think. That is the cognitive process, right? The rational part of the mind. Then there is another aspect of the mind which is unconscious, in the sense that it arises at its own choosing and it disturbs the mano. This is the emotional mind. We call the affective process. So we have to differentiate. Whenever the Buddha spoke about the mind, he either used the word mano or chitta, but each time he used these words, he meant something very specific. And we will examine in great details how the Buddha used these two different words to mean different things in various aspects, various parts of the sutras that the Buddha was basically delivering. So when Buddha used the word mano, he meant the thinking mind. When Buddha used the word chitta, he meant the emotional mind. And we will see later on how important it is to understand the difference. Right? Many translators, unfortunately, do not differentiate between these two. And as a result, many people find it a bit difficult to appreciate, understand, and even put into practice what the Buddha was trying to teach. And I'm going to show you one important lesson further on today, where the Buddha was describing how to still the chitta. And he was referring specifically to the emotional mind, the affective process. Not just mind, but the emotional mind. So we will come to that in a moment. So with this, now you can get a copy of this when you download the link, the presentation slides, okay? Then you will see this. For those of you who are new to our sharing, okay? So when we speak about vijnana, we're talking about perceiving through our sense organs. When we speak about mano, we're talking about cognizing. That means identifying, becoming aware of the experience, experiencing the objective, our objective experience, cognizing the experience. And at the same time, conceiving, creating concepts. We begin to have ideas and concepts about what we have perceived. And these concepts arise from past experiences. And with these concepts, we begin to have choices. And with the chitta part of mind, basically, this is the affective process of mind, the affection, the feeling, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And then we have this emotional urge to react. And as we react, we begin to personalize the reaction, leading to the notion of a self-centered existence. So this is these three different aspects of mind. It's very important to understand and differentiate between them. So I hope what I have shared in these last two slides are helpful for you to differentiate between what the Buddha meant when he said mano and what the Buddha meant when he said chitta. They are distinctly different meaning and different context. So now let's take a look at the difference between the thinking mind and the emotional mind, basically between mano and chitta. And I will let Bhante Punnaji explain to you this difference.
When we speak about the mind, we really have two minds. Most people don't know that. One mind is the thinking mind. The other mind is the emotional mind. Now the thinking mind can think, but it is the emotional mind that wants things or hates things or fears things or worries about things. That is the emotional mind. Now when you come to the temple and say take up the 5 precepts, it is the thinking mind that is doing that. But you go home and maybe you quarrel with your husband or wife or whoever, or maybe neighbors, or why is that? That is done by the emotional mind, not the thinking mind. And so, even if we understand, when you read the book, you understand everything, your understanding is done by the thinking mind. But you cannot live according to your understanding because the emotional mind goes in the opposite direction. Are we free from crime? Are we free from wars? Are we free from terrorism, injustice? Why all these things? Because the emotional mind is dominating the world today. The thinking mind is only a slave of the emotional mind. This is why the thinking mind has created the nuclear weapons that can even destroy the world. Because everything that the thinking mind has done is what the emotional mind wants. So this is why the Buddha pointed out that what we need is to start working according to the thinking mind and not the emotional mind. That the thinking mind should dominate the world, not the emotional mind. The thinking mind has to learn to control the emotional mind. That is the important thing. And that is what we learn in the teachings of the Buddha. What we call meditation is learning to gain control over the emotional mind.
So Bhante was saying that it is the thinking mind must learn to gain control over the emotional mind. And we will be spending quite a bit of time looking at how the Buddha was teaching us how to apply the thinking mind to gain control over the emotional mind. That's why it's so important to differentiate between mano, the thinking mind, and chitta, the emotional mind. If you don't differentiate between these two, when you look at the sutras, you will not be able to truly understand how to apply what the Buddha was trying to teach us. And this is one of the greatest contribution of Bhante Punnaji to the world of Dharma, because of his ability to differentiate this and explain it very thoroughly by differentiating it. Whereas many other translators just simply call it mind. So it'll be much more difficult for you to really understand and apply what the Buddha was trying to teach. So Bhante was talking about comparing between the thinking and the emotions. And he said, the emotional mind wants things, fears things, worries about things, etc. And it is dominating the world. And the thinking mind is only a slave to the emotional mind, because the thinking mind and the emotional mind are always in conflict. And when they are in conflict, the emotional mind wins. I'm going to show you later on the scientific evidence behind why is it that our emotions will win over our thinking when the two are in conflict. There is a very powerful neurological explanation behind that, right? So that's why the thinking mind is often controlled by the emotional mind. The emotional mind basically wants things, hates things, fears things, and that is what is affecting the thinking mind. So the thinking mind is reacting according to desires, to anger, and to worries and fears, and so on. And the Buddha actually taught us that the way to train ourselves to tame our emotions is through meditation, bhavana, right? And this trains the thinking mind to gain control over the emotional mind. That's why it's so important that Bhante explained bhavana with this very simple definition. He said, it is by being conscious all the time that we can control our emotions. The constant practice of being conscious is what the Buddha called bhavana, or development. And the key word here is being conscious. So when you're conscious, when emotional mind is disturbing you, because you are fully conscious of what's going on, then you are aware of what is disturbing you. This consciousness, right? Basically, there are many words to describe this consciousness. One of the words commonly used is called mindfulness. But mindfulness does not properly describe the meaning. Here it is the meaning of the thinking mind being conscious. And by remaining conscious, it will not be easily controlled by the emotional mind. In fact, by remaining conscious, the thinking mind is in control. Whereas the thinking mind that is being disturbed by the emotional mind, if it does not remain conscious, it is easily distracted by the desires, the angers and hatreds of the emotional mind, and it is reacting according to those. That's why we have to maintain this state of consciousness. And Bhante Punnaji taught us that in order to cultivate this consciousness, then we need to practice introspection, bringing our attention inwards, observing the four aspects, right? Observing basically how the body reacts to whatever is going on, how we feel about this reaction, and also how emotional states arise, and finally how the thoughts are created arising from that, how thoughts are created. And when we are conscious of these, we can be in full control. And this practice is the practice of satipatthana, which is often translated as mindfulness. But the word that Bhante used is very precise. He called it introspective awareness or introspection. Sometimes he calls it systematic introspection. Okay, so this is how we can cultivate this consciousness all the time. Now, if we are not conscious, then we experience what is called vichikicha. Right? This is the cognitive dissonance, which is basically the conflict between the emotional mind and the thinking mind. So feeling, right, which is coming from our emotions, and reasoning, which is coming from our intellect, our thinking, they are in conflict. They fight with each other. Now, it is often translated as skeptical doubt, this word vichikicha. But the real meaning of vichikicha is cognitive dissonance, and what it is referring to is that the mind enters into a state of perplexity. The mind was experiencing different things and not able to differentiate clearly one from the other. So the mind became perplexed, a little bit confused. And with that, the mind falls into a state of indecisiveness, unable to decide what to choose or how to respond. And in that indecisiveness, the mind begins to experience stress and distress. Stress is what happens to the body because of stress hormones. So the body changes. Distress is the mind getting disturbed by these bodily changes. So we experience stress and distress in the body and the mind. And when that happens, we become confused. We fall into a state of confusion and emotional dilemma, what to decide on. And that's when the mind is in turmoil. And because of that, the mind begins to doubt what seems real and what we should do realistically. And that's why people translate this as skeptical doubt. But the real meaning, you have to understand, begins with perplexity, indecisiveness, leading to stress and distress. Therefore, the mind becomes confused and ends up in a state of turmoil. That is what cognitive dissonance means, because the two minds are pulling in opposite direction. So it's like a tug of war between feeling pulling in one direction and thinking, the reasoning pulling in the other direction. That's why the chitta and the mano are often in conflict. So the whole idea is to bring them together to stop this conflict by unifying the two minds, bringing the two minds together. But while they are still in conflict, then this is leading to quite a lot of suffering. Okay, so let's take a look at what the scientists are saying about this. Now I just want to quickly mention this is very important. In our brain, there is a part of the brain which is the emotional brain, and there is a part of the brain in the frontal lobe, which is the thinking brain. The emotional brain, the controlling center of the emotional brain is the amygdala. There is a structure in the emotional brain called the amygdala. That basically triggers chain reaction that leads to all kinds of emotions. But in the thinking brain, at the bottom part of the frontal lobe, right behind the eyebrow, there is this prefrontal cortex. That is the core of the thinking brain. And these two are often in conflict. So let's listen to what the scientists are saying about the tug of war between this feeling in the emotions and reasoning in the thinking brain. When these two are in conflict, which one wins? 99% of the time, emotions win. We make decisions based on emotions.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off.
It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions.
At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses.
You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is, if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions, this is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has super highways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
So the scientist was saying that the brain is evolved to do fancy things, not to control emotions. So the thinking brain is basically evolved to make our life more enjoyable and invent things and stuff like that. Despite all the intelligence, we are not able to control the emotions. And the reason is very simple. From the emotional brain, the amygdala, there are very strong neural connections, neural networks connecting to the thinking brain. So when the emotional brain is agitated, is aroused, the amygdala is hyperactive. It is actually sending a lot of sabotaging messages, sabotaging signals to the thinking brain. And in doing so, it's confusing the thinking brain, because when the thinking brain tries to reason out and think, it is experiencing a lot of neural connections and various signals coming from the emotional brain, disturbing it. So the thinking brain is not able to think peacefully. So the thinking brain is disturbed by the emotional brain. But at the same time, from the thinking brain, there is very weak connections going back to the emotional brain. So the thinking brain is not able to send signals back to the emotional brain to tame the emotional brain. This is why the Buddha taught us meditation, to train us how we can tame the emotional brain. And the ultimate solution really to tame the emotional brain is to stop the activity of chitta. And by doing, and in doing so, it is basically joining chitta with mano so that the two parts become one. They call this unification, unification of the mind. So let's take a look at this unification of the mind. There is a sutra in Anguttara Nikaya 4.94 called Tatatiya Samadhi Sutra, where the Buddha was describing a number of things, amongst which talking about how to practice samatha. Basically, samatha is the tranquility meditation. Samatha bhavana is the tranquility meditation, and this is the meditation that helps to tame and still the emotional mind. So chitta will be brought to a state of stillness. And in here, the Buddha described 4 steps. First, he basically described that this chitta needs to be steady. Right? I'll just run through the 4 first, then I'll explain one by one. So chitta needs to be steadied, and then the chitta needs to settle down. And then the chitta needs to be unified. So here, what is chitta being unified with? Chitta is unified with mano. And then finally, with that, the chitta can then be brought to a state of mental equilibrium. The translation of samadhi here is concentration, concentrated. And Bhante Punnaji has pointed out that this is not a good translation. A lot of old school translators have translated samadhi as concentration or concentrated. But what Bhante Punnaji pointed out is mental equilibrium. That means the mind is now in harmony and very stable, still and stable, not agitated. So this is mental equilibrium. So bear that in mind. Okay, the best way to describe these 4 stages or 4 steps, these are 4 successive steps, consecutive steps, one followed by the other. Right? It's not 4 things at the same time, one followed by the other. So the best way to describe this is to think of the activity of the mind as though it's, let's say we use the body as the example. You're running. So that is what the mind is normally doing. It is running around with all kinds of thoughts, right? Like a monkey hopping from tree to tree, swinging from tree to tree. So the mind is constantly running around with all kinds of thoughts. So if you think of a person running, jogging, that's really what happened. So in the first step, to be steadied means that person who is running, what is a more peaceful and stable posture after running? So instead of running, now that person has to stop running and stand still. So now that is what is known by as steady. So steadying the chitta is like the runner now standing still. So now your mind has to learn to relax and basically stop running around, right? So basically to calm down and not run around. But that is not yet enough, right? So that is called steadying. Now, when a person is standing, right, from a standing position, what is the next more peaceful, more stable and harmonious position? And that is the person sits down. Because when you are standing, your whole body weight is supported by your feet. So there is still quite a bit of tension going on in your feet. But if you were to sit down, at least half your body weight, the lower half of your body weight is no longer being supported by your feet. So now you are sitting down, you become more settled down. So this word settled down is like the runner now, after stopping running, he sits down. Okay. Now, what is the next thing more stable and more peaceful than sitting down? And that is to lie down. So now the person begins to just lie down. So this is really when the person lying down, he is flat, basically, right? And this is equivalent to this unification of the mind. The chitta is no longer active. It is now unified with mano. And this process of unification is what the Buddha called ekagata. So the unification is happening. Okay, so basically this is the mind becoming unified. And when the mind becomes unified, it is now able to enter into a state of samadhi, mental equilibrium. And this is when the yogi practicing samatha bhavana, the tranquility meditation, begins to experience jhana. Okay. Now, the first part, steadying the mind, right, from running to standing, this is really the process of abandoning the five hindrances. When the five hindrances are abandoned, then the mind can be steadied. Otherwise, the mind is constantly being disturbed, right? So the chitta is constantly reacting to the five hindrances and therefore disturbing the mind. So these five hindrances arises to disturb the mind. So therefore, steadying means to abandon the five hindrances. So this is really what the Buddha was teaching about samatha bhavana, tranquility meditation leading to jhana. That means the now experiencing mental equilibrium, samadhi. Right? So now let's listen to Bhante explain this process of samadhi.
There is always something pulling something in this world. And therefore, to be remaining still means it is in balance somehow. That is why it is equilibrium. Equilibrium means the pulls are in an equal state. This is only the tranquility comes. So this is why it is very important to understand that samadhi is not concentration. Most people translate it as concentration. Samadhi is not concentration, it is a state of mental equilibrium. Now, when you reach that state of mental equilibrium, that is called entering the jhana. Entering the jhana. And what is the meaning of jhana? Now again, a lot of people think jhana is a state of concentration. Jhana is not concentration. Jhana is what is called a withdrawal. Now, if I go out of this room and stay at the door outside, that is called standing out. That standing out is called ecstasy. The word ecstasy is usually understood as getting excited. It is not getting excited. It is standing out of all excitement. That means calming the mind. All the emotional excitement, you are getting out of it. That is standing out. So, you are withdrawing from the world of emotional excitement. It's a withdrawal and standing out. So the first ecstasy is to stand out of the emotional world.
So Bhante described jhana as ecstasy. That is, the emotional mind is being stopped. And that is standing out of this emotional experience. Standing out. That means basically, if you imagine the emotional experience, you're being surrounded by emotional experience, you basically take a step back, right? So in practicing this samatha bhavana, you're really bringing the chitta, part of the mind, to a state of stillness. So standing out and stopping it, unifying chitta with mano. The two minds become one. And that is when you can experience equilibrium. Because Bhante was describing that there's always tugging, pulling between different forces. So the mano and the chitta is in conflict until you first abandon the five hindrances. So now the chitta becomes steadied, and then the chitta calms down and settles down. And when the two become unified, then you are able to enter into the jhanas. Right? So basically, the first thing to do when we practice this samatha bhavana is to abandon the five hindrances. Because if we don't remain conscious, if we are not constantly aware of our physical and mental cultivations, right? We're not conscious in our physical and mental cultivations in bhavana, we invariably experience these five types of emotional disturbances called the five hindrances, pancha nivarana. And this corrupt the thinking mind and weaken the wisdom. And by this happening, you will never experience mental equilibrium. So you need to learn how to abandon these five hindrances, right? I will talk more about the practice to abandon the five hindrances at a future sharing, right? Today we will just run through this whole thing called the insecurity of life, right? Now, I receive a question, and this is a very timely and relevant question. It so happened that I was preparing this presentation, and when this question came in, it was to me a very great moment, because that is a good starting point in describing and discussing this insecurity of life. So this is the question that came in, and basically the person asked, I wanted to ask if belief, opinion, and thought is a perception. So in other words, we spoke about perception, vijnana, and this person wants to know, is belief vijnana, or is opinion vijnana, or is thought vijnana? Which of these is the vijnana? So I explained quite thoroughly. Actually, this was through messaging. So I just rewrote the, clean up the message. So I'll show you my response to this question. Belief, opinion, and thought. First, when we talk about beliefs, beliefs are a result of our past experiences, as well as what we were taught by our teachers, our parents, and our elders, right? Various people teach us things, and from our own experience, we begin to form beliefs. We believe in something, and it could be religious belief, or it could be political belief, or it could be some other beliefs, right? Social beliefs and whatever. So beliefs are formed, and when they are formed, right, beliefs are strong. Beliefs is not just something you think about. Belief is something you trust, right? You put your faith into it. You trust it. It can be religious. It can be social activities. It can be many things, right? So basically, you put your trust into it. And when they are formed, they get embedded deep within the memory system. And when they are embedded into the memory system, then over time, they begin to mature or evolve. Some beliefs will evolve. Some beliefs may not evolve very much. But as we experience subsequently more and more experiences in life, our beliefs may begin to adjust itself according to our experiences. Right? So basically, this is like maturing of beliefs. And in some cases, if we begin to experience things that are opposite to our beliefs, and we begin to understand that it is not quite according to our beliefs, we may start to change our belief. And this is what evolve means. It may begin to evolve. See, beliefs do not turn around completely. They evolve, and they may evolve and take a U-turn. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. We're talking about beliefs which are embedded deep within our memory system. And beliefs are what is called unconscious repressed memories. When they are buried deep into our memory system, they become unconscious repressed memories. That means the beliefs go into the background, but it's buried deep inside, and it is not conscious. We are not constantly thinking about it. We go about our daily activities, but it is there. And it is what is known as unconscious repressed memories. And the Buddha has a word for it. It's called anusayam. These unconscious repressed memories are called anusayam. Now, anusayam doesn't mean beliefs. It means unconscious repressed memories. Beliefs become unconscious repressed memories. And so this unconscious repressed memories is basically what the Buddha described as anusayam. But in the sutras, this word anusayam is often translated by translated as underlying tendencies. It's very poorly translated. The more accurate word, according to Bhante Punnaji, is unconscious repressed memories. I will let Bhante explain this in a moment. So from there, from time to time, these unconscious repressed memories, they arise, they pop up, they trigger thoughts. So they arise in the form of thoughts. Thoughts start to pop up from our beliefs, right? And these thoughts, they manifest in the form of memories, expectations, and imaginations. Memories means we are recollecting something that happened in the past. Expectations means we are having desires for something in the present moment to change. Imagination means we start to have wishes for something in the future. So this is really past, recollection, present, desires, and future wishes, memories, expectations, imaginations. And these are the mental perceptions. So when these thoughts arise, they are mental perceptions, mano vinyanya. So thoughts arise as mano vinyanya, mental perceptions. And then with these mental perceptions, we begin to form opinions. It shapes our thinking. And then we begin to have a certain opinions. And with that, it starts to shape the choices, right? With opinions, we start to think we can do this or we can do that. We start to think of choices and we start to make decisions what to do. So choices is thinking of various options, and decision making is deciding which option to then act upon. So if we were to choose something and or make a decision about something, these are called volitions. And the Pali word for that is chetana, volition, or we can also call it intentions, right? You have an intention, you have a volition, something you want, something you thought about. That means you actually consciously want it, right? It's not like something unconscious. You really want to do something, right? So this is choices, decisions. They are called volitions, chetana. And when we act upon our chetana, we act on our volitions, we are actually creating physical karma in the form of speech or in the form of action. If we act on it, not just think about it, but act on it, do something about it. So we either say something or we act and do something physically. And this leads to consequences. Whatever you say, whatever you do, always has consequences. That's vipaka. Right? Now, even if you don't act upon it, if we do not act on our volitions, that means we have the chetana. We think about something and we decided upon something, but we didn't take the action. We didn't say it. We didn't do anything. Even if we even if we do not act on it, and the fact that we have thought about it and we entertain the thought and we allow it to continue to dominate our thinking, when you allow these volitional thoughts, these choices and decisions dominate your thinking, then we are creating mental karma. So it is still creating karma, karma of the mind, mental karma. And this again also leads to some form of consequences over time. Vipaka will arise. So basically, these are all the insecurities of life, right? And this is really this chain reaction that leads to suffering. These are all insecurities of life, right? And these are the realities of the dream of existence, insecurity of life. Even if we thought about a volition, we don't act on it, it still can create suffering. How do we deal with thoughts? Now, the important thing to remember is that we cannot stop thoughts arising at their own pace. Thoughts pop up as they choose. You know that when you try to meditate and you sit there in the quietest place in the world with your eyes closed and trying to clear your mind of all these crazy thoughts running around, as you settle down and you calm down, suddenly thoughts pop up, right? So we can't stop that. It comes up. This is usually the work of the chitta, right? Chitta is the unconscious mind that is triggering all kinds of thoughts popping up, right? And we cannot stop them arising. We can just learn to let it go. So when unwholesome thoughts, now we talk about thoughts that may bring suffering, unwholesome thoughts. When these unwholesome thoughts arise, learn to abandon them. Let them go. Do not entertain them. Do not dwell upon them. Do not consider them, right? So you just treat it as a non-event. Don't try to think about it. Don't ponder over it, because the more you ponder over unwholesome thoughts, the more likely unwholesome thoughts will continue to pop up and disturb you. So by letting it go and just ignoring it, do not entertain them. Don't fight it. That's the other thing. Don't fight it. Don't say, go away, go away. Don't do that. Just let it go, right? I'll talk more about how to deal with them in a future sharing when we start talking about practices, various practices. But here I'm just showing you the response to that question about beliefs, opinions, and thoughts, okay? So repressed thoughts may arise at any time without our control or choosing. They just pop up as they wish. And this is what is known as Anicha. Thoughts just pop up, unpredictable, right? Unstable. We don't know when they come, but it happens. So this is Anicha. And when they arise, they lead to all kinds of anxiety, conflict, stress, distress, suffering. If we start to dwell upon them, if we let them go, we will not experience the suffering. But because we dwell upon them and we entertain them and or act upon them, we will experience all kinds of dukkha. This can be the result of the consequence of our action, the vipaka of our action, anicca, dukkha, and then thoughts are really visitors. Remember this, I'm repeating it. Thoughts are merely visitors. Thoughts are not you. Thoughts pop up and then they vanish. They pop up, they vanish. If you dwell upon them, they will pop up more and more. Right? You like them, they like you, they will come and visit you more. Right? So thoughts are not really you, they are visitors. And thoughts are impersonal. That means it's not really targeting at you, it just arises at its own choosing. So it is not personal, impersonal, anatta. This is really the realities in the dream of existence. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Thoughts are impersonal. They just pop up as they wish. You can't choose them. They just come. But they will go. Now, I'm going to use another metaphor to help you learn how to deal with them, right? So thoughts are visitors. So imagine your mind is like your house. So your mind is your house. You're inside the house. You're inside the mind, okay? Thoughts are visitors. So thoughts are like visitors knocking on the door of your house. Your house is your mind. So thoughts are like visitors knocking on the door. If unwholesome thoughts come knocking, just remain calm, peaceful inside, right? In your house. Your house is your mind. Just remain calm and peaceful. Do not answer the door. Because the moment you answer the door, you are now interacting with these thoughts. You begin to entertain the visitor. Now, when you entertain the visitor, what happens? The visitor will come more often, right? So do not answer the door. Don't even ask the visitor to go away. Don't fight it. Just ignore the knocking. So if somebody is knocking on the door and you just keep quiet, you pretend you're not home, and you just ignore the knocking, and you go about doing your own things quietly, peacefully, calmly, whoever is knocking on the door will then think that there's nobody home. So just ignore the knocking. Abandon any reaction to these unwholesome thoughts that are knocking on the door, because they are just visitors. Eventually, they will go away thinking there's nobody home. So if there's no response to their knocking, the thoughts will go away, disappear by themselves. They come and they go. Whatever arises has to fade away. They cannot stay forever. That's anicca, right? So the thoughts will go away. And the practice behind this is called mindfulness. This is achieved by the practice of mindfulness. But to be more specific, what Bhante Punnaji has taught us is introspection. Right? More specifically, it is introspection as found in this step number 6 of the Eightfold Way. That is commonly translated as right effort, harmonious exercise. That's what Bhante Punnaji calls sama vayama. Right? So I won't go into details or elaborate on this, but I just want to quickly point out the practice of this sama vayama is really the 4 harmonious exercises known as Chattari Samapadana. I will be talking about this in more details in one of the future sharing in this new topic, insecurity of life. So I will come to that at another occasion. Basically, this is in answer to that question about thoughts, about beliefs, opinions, and thoughts. What is perception? So thought is the mental perception. Okay. So I hope that is clear. Now we talk about this repressed unconscious memory, and let Bhante Punnaji explain to you what is the meaning of this anusayam. This is the repressed unconscious memory.
Anusaya really means, saya means sleeping. Anusaya means sleeping. That means, what is the meaning of sleeping? This is what Sigmund Freud called repression. That means people begin to forget things, and once it is forgotten, you don't even know that you are having certain things. You are not aware of it. And that kind of sleeping is what is called repression. And so, what is called psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud was to bring out these hidden, repressed things, bring it out and to become aware of it. What is unconscious is made conscious. So to make the unconscious conscious is what the Buddha, what the Sigmund Freud did, and that is what the Buddha did also, ultimately, to make the unconscious conscious. That unconsciousness is what is called avidya. And so, our mind is normally in an unconscious state. Most of the time, although we think we are conscious, most of the time we are acting unconsciously. This is the point. And this is why Sigmund Freud used the analogy of the iceberg. When the iceberg is kept in the water, it's like a piece of ice you put in the water, it begins to float. What is out of the water is only a small piece, the rest is inside the water. So in the same way, our mind, when we say we are conscious, we are only a small piece is conscious. The rest is all happening unconsciously.
So Bhante was saying only a small piece is conscious. That means we need to cultivate so that we become more and more conscious. This cultivation of consciousness is very important, and that is practiced through introspection, right? And that is really the practice of satipatthana. We will come to that at a later sharing. So I hope this is clear. What is anusayam? These are repressed unconscious memory. At the next sharing, I will explain further, because there's a sutra that explains this anusayam, and we're going to examine what is taught in that sutra, very importantly, based on Bhante Punnaji's translations. So now I want to introduce you to another very important concept in neuroscience, very important. This is called the default mode network, right? And this is associated with our conscious and unconscious mind. What the scientist was trying to do, it was actually discovered by this scientist by the name of Marcus Reichley. He was doing some research at Washington University in St. Louis, He's the professor of neurology, neurobiology, and biomedical engineering. He was doing some experiments and investigations into the state of consciousness, and he was curious about what happens when a person is at the state of rest, relaxing. What is going on in the brain of a person who is relaxing? And he started off thinking that when a person is doing nothing and just resting, the mind becomes peaceful and the mind eventually slows down. That's what he was thinking. But to his surprise, it was the opposite. What he did was he put people through the MRI to scan activity of the brain to see which part of the brain is active. And then he asked the person, it's not asking the person to sleep. This is not talking about sleep state. This is talking about just resting and idling. The mind is idling. So when the mind is idling, what is it doing? And to his surprise, the parts of the brain associated with thinking about the self, focusing on the self, became hyperactive. So in other words, when a person's mind is idling, the mind begins to go into thinking a lot about self, right? And this is very important because this so-called mind that is at peace, the mind that is at rest, idling, that is the same mind when you are meditating. So when people try to meditate, what happens? If they don't remain conscious, that idling mind falls into thinking about the self and everything associated with the self. So let's take a look at what Marcus Reichley was saying about this default mode network.
What is it? What do you understand so far about that default mode network?
It's quite an elaborate system, and if you take a look at its individual parts, you have to come away with the sense that the functions we can now associate with that have a self-referential component to them.
Meaning what? Meaning
well, for example,
that
if
something is going to affect me?
there is a self-referential connection between the memory and me as a person, that we were an actor in the event. What did I have for breakfast? Where was I yesterday? When did I meet this person? And so forth. So memory is a component of it, but it is a special part of memory, it seems, that has this self-referential component. Something else that is very important, if you then leap to the front of the default mode network, one of the distinguishing features are the areas there that are very often associated in general with emotion, but more specifically about the evaluation of incoming information to the brain. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this dangerous? And whatever.
And it would be based on previous experience?
Almost for sure. And actually, it has also been associated with the mental state of other people. In other words, this theory of mind. That,
the default mode network is involved in the theory of mind?
It's some suggestion that it might be. In other words, your beliefs, desires, and intentions are very important to me, or should be.
So they were mentioning it's associated with this theory of mind. So you heard what the founder of this default mode network was saying. Unfortunately, he was not very good at explaining, but I do have another clip from another scientist who then did more research on default mode network and was able to explain beautifully in great details what really is default mode network. But let's just take a look at what Marcus Reichley spoke about. Basically, he says functions associated with default mode network have a self-referential component. What does that mean? That means these functions, he's actually observing what goes on in the brain. So those brain functions associated with this default mode network have this self-referential component, means it is actually the part of the brain that is focusing on the self self-referential, referring to the self-referential component. So basically, default mode network is referring to when the mind is idle. What is it doing? It is basically frequently focusing on the self-referential. Okay. Self-referential connection between the memory and me. That means bringing up memory and me as a person, right? And begin to examine that I am the actor in the event. That means you actually are both the third party observing the event as well as you are the one participating in the event in the memory, right? And memory is a component of it, but it is the special part of the memory that has this self-referential component. That means it's a special part of the memory that is doing this. And that part of the memory is constantly thinking about whatever that one has experienced. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it dangerous? Now, this aspect is really appreciating or experiencing the feeling associated with whatever you are experiencing. So it's really like the Vedana part of the mind, right? Is this pleasant? Is this unpleasant? So basically the self-referential part is actually constantly asking that based on previous experiences. And he mentioned very clearly, this is associated with the mental states of other people. That means we don't just look at ourselves, but we also look at ourselves in relation to other people's behavior. And this is called theory of mind, right? So therefore, the last part that Marcus Reichley was saying is very important. He says, your beliefs, desires, and intentions are very important to me. So that means when you're having this self-referential component, you begin to think about the other person, right? Where is that person coming from in terms of the beliefs and desires and intentions? Okay, so that is one part of it. Now let's look at another scientist explaining this. Before we go further, let's take a look at the meaning of this theory of mind. It's very important because basically theory of mind refers to this mental capacity, our capability to understand other people and their behavior by ascribing mental states to them. And these states may be different from our own. That means when we observe how other people are behaving towards us, we begin to judge them. We begin to think of them acting in a certain way that may or may not be the same as us, right? These states may be different from one's own states, including beliefs, desires, intentions, and emotions. Having a functional theory of mind is considered crucial for success in everyday human social interactions and is used when analyzing, judging, and inferring others' behaviors. So having a functional theory of mind, that means this theory of mind, if we have a functional capacity to engage in this theory of mind, this is very important in the success of our interactions, our social interactions, the way we deal with people. And this last part is very important, right? It is used when analyzing, judging, and inferring others' behavior. So in other words, when the mind is idling, right, entering into this default mode network, it is also frequently judging other people's behavior by comparing with our own. So there's a lot of comparison going on, right? So that's why we are very judgmental. We are living in the delusion of a self-centered existence, constantly thinking about ourselves and judging others. So now let's listen to another scientist, Dr. Ronald Siegel, who is the psychopharmacologist in the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. He has a more complete explanation of this default mode network, even though he's not the founder of this thing called the default mode network.
What we discover is that our sense of being a coherent, separate, self, a sort of a sense of continuity of consciousness, is actually something of a delusion. And the closer we look, the harder it is to find that elusive self. And this has many important implications for psychotherapy. And those are what we're going to talk about today. So in Buddhist traditions, which many of you know are one of the traditions that have developed mindfulness practices, and of all the traditions that have developed them, it's the Buddhist traditions that we draw upon most in Western psychotherapeutic uses of mindfulness practices. There it says that if we do these practices, we'll have a glimpse into anatta. And so what does that mean? That is this sense that there isn't some solid self in there. You know, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. A more modern update of that might be, I have a to-do list, therefore I am. Or perhaps, I have likes on my Facebook account, therefore I am. What we find, though, is that Descartes was onto something. That thinking is one of the ways that we construct a sense of separate self. In fact, our sense of self is maintained by this constant inner chatter, by the way that we talk to ourselves about ourselves all day long. And all day long we listen to these thoughts, these words passing through our mind, and of course we come to assume that, well, I must exist. The star of this show, the hero of this drama, must be a very important person, and he must be there. What we see from mindfulness practice is actually, it's just an endless series of sub-vocalized words. These words arising in consciousness, these narratives playing out. And we see that it's happening against the backdrop of the kaleidoscope of all different bodily sensations as well as external sensory experiences of sight, of sound, of everything else that appears in consciousness. And what we notice is attention goes from one to the other. It goes from the breath to a sound, to an itch on the scalp, to the image of a friend, to remembering an upsetting email. But what we don't find is the little homunculus inside. And I'm sorry, I'm not saying next slide, so we should be on the homunculus slide here. We never find the little man or woman inside who is having all of these experiences in consciousness. Rather, we just see this ongoing flux of mental contents. Next slide, please. And people have tracked what's going on neurobiologically. And what's happening when we're talking to ourselves about ourselves and thinking about what we like and what we don't like and thinking about others is there's the activation of an area of the brain called the default mode network. And this is what's activated when we're not actively pursuing desires or actively trying to achieve some goal. And while this default mode network is activated, we're thinking a great deal about who we are, how we compare to others, what's going to happen to us, and we're remembering things that we've done and planning for the future. And it turns out that it is the activation of this default mode network that is an important part of developing a sense of me or I. So next slide. Who am I? It turns out that there are two types of self-reference that cognitive psychologists have identified. One of them is called the narrative focus, and this is when we talk to ourselves about ourselves and particularly talk about our enduring traits. You know, I'm a nice guy, I'm a smart guy, I'm a dumb guy, I'm a mean guy, I'm a father, I'm a husband. All of these kinds of discussions of ourselves in narrative mode. And this involves the words that are occurring in our mind all day long. The other mode, experiential focus, is actually simply noticing the moment-to-moment kaleidoscope of inner experience. The itch, the ache, a thought arising and passing, and the like. And we know that when people are involved in this experiential focus, which those of you who are meditators will recognize is indeed what we're trying to cultivate during mindfulness practice, there's a lot of activation of the insula, which is the part of the brain which has many functions, as all brain parts do, but it seems particularly involved in interoception, in noticing the moment-to-moment sensations in the body.
So you notice that the scientist was saying that that default mode network refers to the state of the mind when we are not busy engaged with a task. That means we're not busy doing something. This is when the mind is idling. That means we're just sitting there either relaxing or trying to fall asleep, or in this case, trying to meditate, because when you are meditating, you go into meditation, you're not trying to do anything. As soon as you try to do something in meditation, then that is not meditation anymore, right? So when the mind is in an idle state, right, the mind is not engaged with performing a task, it falls into what is called default mode network. And as this Ronald Siegel was talking about, he says, when we are not focused on pursuing a specific goal or doing a task, there are two types of self-reference. That means we think of ourselves in two ways. The first one is an existential way. This self-reference that is existential is what he called narrative focus. Now, I must point out now, at this point in time, this research in default mode network is still relatively new, right? So they have not formalized in deep details what is all this default mode network is all about. They are still coming up with new findings. So they basically classify two types of self-reference. The first type is called narrative focus. This is very much existential focus, existence, focusing on our existence. Things like who are we, right? And how we compare to others, right? So this is really the existence between us and other people, and what's going to happen to us, right? The past, the present, and the future. And remembering things we have done. So this is recollecting the past. And planning for the future. So this is dealing with the future then. And talking to ourselves about ourselves. And this is the present moment, right? Even in the present moment in default mode network, we talk to ourselves, about how we feel. The other self-reference is an experiential focus. This is experiential, not existential anymore. This is basically observing the experience, and this is really what meditation should be. But very often when we meditate, we don't do this. We do the first part. We do the narrative focus, right? Because the mind is idle, it falls into narrative focus. But when we do meditation, we should be going into experiential focus. And that is moment-to-moment awareness of the experience. And awareness of sensations and feelings going on. And basically, awareness of thoughts arising and passing, right? Awareness of sensations and feelings. This is really in Satipatthana, the Dhammanupassana, right? Sorry, I beg your pardon, not Dhammanupassana. It's Kayanupassana, the body, sensations, and the feelings, Vedananupassana. So this is the first two of Satipatthana. Then thoughts arising and passing. This is really associated with the next two aspects of Satipatthana, and that is Chittanupassana and Dhammanupassana. So awareness of emotions arising and passing, and also thinking, thoughts arising and passing. So this experiential focus is what the mind should be engaged in when we meditate. But very often we fall into narrative focus, the existential aspect of the mind. So this is really what is going on with default mode network. I think that is all we can talk about today. So in summary, let's basically, I hope I have given an overview of all the things we're going to be covering in the next 3 more sharing on this insecurity of life. So what we have covered today is very importantly to recognize that it is this affective process of mind, the chitta. This is our emotional, subjective experience, right? And that is basically whatever we experience in life, we feel something about it. We have a feeling about it, Vedana, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. Then we begin to react to it, and this is the tanha, the emotional reaction to feelings of the objective experience. And when we react, we begin to personalize our reaction and our experiences, upadana, personalizing the subjective experience. And because of that, we begin to create the notion of existence and coming into existence, this imagery self in an imagery world. So this is really our imagination creating the self in the world. And because of all this, it leads to all kinds of insecurity of life, dukkha. And this leads to all the mass of suffering, right? So in the next 3 sharings, we're going to go into all this in more details, and especially looking at the various practices we can apply to help us still the mind and free ourselves from this suffering. Okay, so next sharing, I will then go into talking about this sutra, Majjhima Nikaya 18, where it was mentioned about the Anusayam. This is the Honey Bowl Sutra, right? Basically what happens, in a nutshell, I'll just summarize this very quickly, because this is associated with what we've been talking about in the past hour or so. This mano, the cognitive process of mind, interprets what was perceived based on categorized memory of the fluid past. And we spoke about papancha before. And because of that, the chitta part of the mind, the affective process part of mind, right, begins to trigger all this imagination, memory, expectation arising from our repressed unconscious memories. In other words, the chitta is disturbing the mano because of anusayam. I repeat, the chitta is disturbing the mano because of anusayam, repressed unconscious memory popping up, and they manifest as self-centered views and concepts. We begin to carry views and concepts, and we begin to personalize these views and concepts. And because we personalize the views and concepts, it leads to debates, conflicts, and arguments. And this is then followed by insecurity of life and the whole mass of suffering arising. These are the realities of the dream of existence. So with this, I end my sharing, right? By concluding that Bhante Punnaji has been teaching us to learn how to cultivate our mind to remain conscious all the time. And through this state of consciousness, by practicing introspective attention, introspection, we are able to control our emotions. And this constant practice is what the Buddha called bhavana. So we have to learn how to practice and apply bhavana in order to tame the chitta. So I hope this has been helpful. And you can download the presentation slides if you have not already done so. And I will also give you a link here to download an advanced copy of this sutra, right? tiny.cc/mn18. So you can download the Madhupindika Sutra. This is the version translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi. But I will be explaining it with Bhante Punnaji's explanations. I will give you Bhante Punnaji's translations when we talk about it next week. So next week we will focus on this Madhupindika Sutra, talking about the Anusayam. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful, and I don't see at the moment, I don't see any questions. So since there are no questions and we are running a little bit late, so we will take this to an end. We have spent the last hour and a half sharing the Dharma, and we have benefited from it, accumulated good merits from all this. And we know there are so many people around the world who are suffering. So let's put our palms together and dedicate the merits to all the people who are suffering. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dharma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope this has been helpful. Please come back again next Monday, same time. We will continue. So I wish you well. May you and your family please stay safe. May you be peaceful, happy, and may you then stay safe. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.